Well, for an owner of property in a land lease, basically you're leasing the land to a tenant, preferably a credit tenant like Chick-fil-A, like you see behind me here. And the advantage for an owner is they don't have to worry about building a building, taking care of the property, any of that. That's all passed on to the tenant. They're responsible for all of the maintenance. They're responsible for building the building and taking care of the property once it's up and running. The landlord basically just collects rent and passes through the taxes and insurance either directly, or they just add it to the cost of the rent. So it's a very easy property to rent, and then they control the land for the long term as it potentially gets more and more valuable depending on the demand of the area. And also they avoid capital gains with a sale. They take their income over the long term, so it's like an annuity. Now, what's the advantages for a tenant? Why would a tenant like Chick-fil-A want to lease the land instead of owning it? Well, a couple of the advantages. Number one is the cost. They don't have to pay for the land. It could be very expensive prime property, so they don't have to pay for it up front, put a big down payment up, and expend all that money to own it. The other thing is they can write off the rent payments from their income, and they can depreciate the improvements. So it's almost like a double tax savings. When you own a property, you can't depreciate the land, and you can't write off the payment for the land as a rent payment. Whereas in the example of a land lease, they can write that lease off of their income, so it reduces the taxable income, and then they can expense through accelerated depreciation the improvements. So there's a lot of advantages for both the landlord and the tenant in a land lease situation, and it can make a lot of sense. The key is it's got to be the right parcel with the right tenant to protect the owner, and for the tenant, it's got to be the right parcel with the right owner. And the risk for each at the end of the day is if somebody goes out of business and leaves that building in place, that's a risk for the owner, that's a risk for the tenant. But generally, if you have the right tenant, the right credit tenant, you don't have to worry about those things, and it's a great long-term investment for both parties.